we're gonna look at Dialogs. So the first thing that you will need to do is download the Dialog example template from Canvas. With this one, you're gonna find a main activity, which will have the layout that you see here, just a couple buttons and a couple fields. We're gonna be working on creating 4 different dialogues, one for each button, and each dialog is gonna do something different to help us fill in the information in our activity. Now in the main activity.java that corresponds to this interface, you're gonna find that we have already created some of the boilerplate code for it. So you will have all of the listeners for the buttons and all of the methods that we need to update some of the UI. Now you will also find a second layout. We're gonna be using this layout in one of our dialogues. We're gonna find also a string resources that we're gonna be using throughout, and you're gonna find different classes that we're gonna be using to implement the fragment dialogues that we're gonna be using. So the first thing that we're gonna be working at is the treats fragment. So as you can see, we extend from dialog fragment, which means that we have to override the onCreate dialog. Now when we create the dialog, the first thing that we want to do is actually create the dialog. So we're going to be using another dialog. We're going to be calling the builder. And this is going to be an instance of other dialog builder. We have to give the builder the context. In this case, it's going to be our activity. And then we're going to be using the builder for setting up the dialog. So in this case, this will be a dialog with 2 different buttons. So first, let's put the message. This is going to be the treats message. Then we're going to have a positive button and a negative button. Okay, that looks good. Now for this, each one of these, whenever you put either positive, negative, or neutral button, which we're not using in this case, you want to pass first the label of the button. So in this case, the positive is going to be give, and the negative is going to be cancel. Now these are just the resource that we are using from the strings resource. So give is going to have this value, and cancel is going to say cancel. It's very self-explanatory. Now the second thing that you need to do is passing the listener for that value or for that button. So in this case, we're going to be using the positive listener, and in this case, the negative listener. I'm doing it like this because I do prefer to have the listeners declared separately rather than doing them in line. So here we're going to create an on-click listener. The most important part that you want to take care of here when you're doing this listener is that you want to create a dialog interface listener, not a view on-click listener, which is the one that we used in our activities. So when you're dealing with dialogs, just use the dialog interface on-click listener. Otherwise, it will not be properly recognized. Now we're gonna create a listener for the positive button first. So positive listener, and then we'll have to override the on-click. Now the one for the negative listener is gonna be very similar. Now what we're gonna be doing is just assigning the value for the treats in our main activity using the method that is provided by the activity called giveTreats. Now in order to do so, the first thing that we need is an instance of our activity. So if we simply say main.getActivity or main activity, and we just call the getActivity method, it's gonna give us an instance of the activity. Now the code doesn't know that the activity is gonna be a main activity, so we can just cast it, and that will allow us to access the methods that are public within the activity itself. So here we're gonna just say that we will give treats, we're gonna be setting a just a random number of treats. So let's use the random, and it's gonna be an integer, and that will give us a random integer for that. And we're going to click cancel. Let's just set it to 0. So we're effectively just deferring the actual update to the activity itself. Now, bear in mind that here we need to know the type of the activity and what methods that activity has, and those methods will need to be public in order for us to do this update in the user interface. Now we can go ahead and run our project in the emulator. Now let's click treats. Oh, oh, we're missing one thing. We haven't linked that dialog to be opened here. So what we need to do is go to our main activity, create the fragment of the dialog that we want to use. So we just create an instance and we just say show. Now show will take in two parameters. The first parameter is going to be the fragment manager. It's going to be the class in charge of managing the fragments, and it will be the one that automatically takes care of rendering the fragment and unrendering it when you're done without having to manually use the fragment manager transactions. And the second one is going to be a tag for your dialog. So dialog t. Now that we have that, we should be able to open the dialog when we click the treats button. And our application crashed. Now, if you look here, we will find that there was an error, and that error is a null pointer exception. Now, if you want, pause the video, try to look at the treats fragment, and try to figure out where the null pointer exception happened, and when you're done, you can come back and we'll look at it together. Okay, you're back. So, if you notice here on the onCreate dialog, we're returning null. This method should not return null, it should return an instance of your dialog, as you can see here. So in order to return an instance of the other dialog, we say the builder.create method, and that will fix the null pointer exception that we had. Treats, and we have our dialog with a message, cancel, and give. If we click on cancel, we get a 0. If we click on give, we get a random number. Now in this case, this number is gonna be unbound, so it can be a very large number, a very small number, even a negative number in some cases. I'm just trying to get a negative number now. Okay, there we go. So that's it for the first dialog. Just keep in mind that you have to return an instance of the dialog here, and then the listener must be of dialog interface type. You can access your main activity or the activity that you are calling the fragment from using the method getActivity, and then use any methods that you have in your activity from the fragment of the dialog. Now, the second dialog that we're going to be looking into is the pick a treat flavor. So this dialog will open a list of flavors for us to select, and then whatever we select is going to be the value that we use here. So for this one, we're going to be using, or we're going to be writing this one in the dialog with list class. So if you notice, it starts pretty much the same as the previous one. We have a class that extends from dialog fragment. We have to override the onCreate dialog. So we know we have to create the dialog, so we can do the same thing we did there. Make sure that we're not returning null or anything. But in this case, we don't have a negative or positive button. We have is a list of items. So you call the set items method, And this will take in two parameters. The first one is going to be the array of elements that you want to use, and the second one is going to be the listener. So I'm just going to call it the list listener, and I'm going to be reusing this one here, just writing it on the top. Perfect. Now, if you notice, in our main activity, we had code for updating the treats. We have another method that updates the address, but we don't have any code over here to update the flavor. So we're gonna be updating it in a different way. This time it's gonna be directly from the fragment. So what we're gonna be doing is using the activity to reference the UI itself. So we know we have a text view, so we can use get activity, and from here we can use any method that we will use in the activity, such as find view by ID. Now this time we don't need to cast because this method exists for any activity, not only for the activity that we're working on as it was before. So this is going to be the text view where we're going to be putting the element, and then we can say set text, and then we're going to see why we put it in there in a couple seconds. Now we know that we can set the text here. Now we just need to get the text that corresponds to the element that the user selected. Fortunately for us, this method already gave us the index of that element in the list. So it's going to be the integer I. So all that we need to do is get an array that contains the elements that we have in our dialog. So let's use the simple get string array, and then we're going to be using the ID that we require. Now I'm just going to be using a linked list here because I like it better, but you could do it some other way. You could effectively just say a string at position I, but I like to use the linked list better. So flavors array, now this is going to be a new, and then we're just going to be adding all of the elements from there. Oops, add all list, and this is going to be the resource array. And there's here I can simply say to get the element at position I. So that will give me the string representation of the element at position I that was clicked in the dialog. Now once we've done that, we can go back to the main activity, and let's just register that one here. Well, that is registered, but we don't have any functionality, so let's just say that we have, it's gonna be the same as here. Just create an instance. We need to change the type of the dialog because this time is the dialog with list. And then we can run our code. Now we look and pick, and we only see this. Now, that's not right, right? We should have a list that contains these elements that we have here. Now, if we go here, this part is actually a conflict. You cannot have a list of items and a message on the same dialog. So those are mutually exclusive and the message has precedence. So if you set a message and set items, you will only see the message. So instead of a message, what we're going to be using is the title. So we're going to be setting a title for the fragment for the dialog itself, and then the content is gonna be the list of items. Whereas before, the dialog that we used here, we could set a title as well, and then the content is gonna be the message and the buttons themselves. Now we can run it once again. Can click on pick. As you can see, we can see now the list. Now this is the title, and these are the elements on the list. So when we click one here, it is automatically rendered in our interface with the correct value. Now just notice that the difference between that one and treats is that in treats, we're delegating the update to code in the main activity, calling the public method, whereas in this one, we're assigning those values from the dialog itself. Okay, so those are the first two fragments. On the next video, we're going to be covering how to do a custom dialog and do a date pick dialog. Thank you.